Well, hello everyone. I hope you can hear me well. I am Philippe Roudier. I am a research officer at the French Development Agency, and I will be your kind of master of ceremony today. So just before we start, I would like to give you some guidelines for this webinar. So they should appear, yes. So yeah, keep in mind that the whole webinar is recorded. This is important, and you will be able to write down short questions during the conference using the online interface. So feel free to ask interesting questions and use the like button for the best ones. And just a little tip, you can use the print screen button on your keyboard to save interesting information like links or graphs and so on. So right now we are going to start with the introduction by Thomas Melonio, who is the Executive Director of the Innovation, Research and Knowledge Department at IFD. Thomas, the mic is yours.
Well, many thanks, Philippe. So first I'd like to remind everyone of the fact that this event was to take place at the AFD's headquarters a few days ago. Unfortunately, due to the lockdown, we had to put it online, but let's take this experiment as a chance to participate, all of us together. Also, a few words to say that the topic, of course, has been impacted by the coronavirus crisis due to the fact that typically meteorological observations suffer from the lockdown, the fact that there are fewer planes currently flying the sky. Also, we are concerned at AFD that agriculture and probably food security may be hardly hit by the crisis. Of course, we have in mind the situation in Africa with the epidemic currently developing in the continent, but we are afraid of value chain interruptions, the fact that food imports might be cut due to restrictions in developed countries, also the fact that seasonal workers might be unable to join the production zones. So that's a lot of reasons why we're concerned about the current situation and its impact on food security. Also to tell you that AFD, I did not present AFD, but you might know that we are the official development agency of the government of France. So we're running the ODA policy for the French government. Just to tell you the kind of activities that our operations are running and their volume. We have more or less 130 or between 130 and 40 million of operational projects currently going on related to climate services. We're very much interested in the innovation brought by such services. And we also have around 65 million of projects under consideration for further years. Apart from these operations and projects directly supported, we have a few research projects that I'm going to mention very rapidly. One with the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, currently studying the participation of private services, the private sector, sorry, to deliver climate services. We currently also have a study, unfortunately partly interrupted, but in Côte d'Ivoire with the sugarcane industry, and trying to with a few partners to imagine how to design relevant climate services for producers of sugarcane in Côte d'Ivoire. With also a starting project in Niger, and one project I'd like to mention in Senegal. Maybe I'm going to show you a few pictures, but it's a climate data portal for Senegal. You have the internet link, so you may connect to it, and you can see region by region this data. The portal tries to provide every user lots of data, whether on rainfall. So what you currently have under your eyes is the projections for rainfalls in Senegal with various climate change scenarios that you have on your right: RCP 26, 4.5, 8.5. So I cannot recommend more strongly to visit and enjoy this portal. And without further, maybe I think there's a next slide, maybe Philippe, if you have it. Oh no, it's just yes. Also, we're trying on this portal to evaluate the impact of climate scenarios on production. So here you have maize yields and their respective evolution depending on the scenario. So you can see that, of course, the most unfavorable scenarios lead to a sharp decrease in maize production in Senegal, down to 50% in the worst case scenario. So just in a few words also to conclude, tell you that AFD will support the WMO 2020 report, which will deal with climate services and disaster risk reduction. So obviously something very relevant, even though it's a health disaster and not a climate disaster as we could have expected. But we support it, and we're very happy to partner with WMO and other partners for this next report. So without further delay, I will, I think, leave the floor. Philippe, interrupt me if I'm wrong, but I think it's Sheikh Khan who will go after me and move ahead with his presentation.
Yeah, exactly, Thomas. Thanks a lot. So I will go a bit deeper in climate services with the definition and context part, which will be done by Sheikh Khan, who is a climate resilience policy advisor at the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center and the regional focal point for West Africa. He's in leave from the French Institute for Research and Development, IRD, and has served previously as a technical assistant for the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs to the African Center of Meteorological Applications for Development, ACMAD, in Niamey. Well, I could go on during like 15 minutes like that because he has a huge experience in climate services, but I prefer to leave the mic to Cher. Cher, if you are ready.
Thank you so much, Philip, and thanks to Thomas for this introduction also. I have, sorry, I'm a bit technical, yeah. I will start my presentation with just situating the climate services within an overall context of adaptation of societies and ecosystems to the effect of climate change, and how they are meant to improve our way to tackle the climate risk management and increase the resilience. I have started, go ahead. Yeah, I have started by putting down different definitions. We will go rapidly through because we don't have time. But the idea of this definition is just to show you how different countries and stakeholders are looking at the climate services as an opportunity. This is the first definition of the roadmap for climate services by the European Research and Innovation DG Research Department. Next. Followed by the UK one, United Kingdom, looking at the climate services as data and information brought together to support adaptation and mitigation programs and to assist with climate risk management. Next one is the French Research Alliance position in that field. Next one. This is the one from the Global Framework for Climate Services. I have showed the first one because also they are insisting a lot on the tools that are developed and are qualified as climate services by themselves. While looking at this one from the GFCS, we can see more detail and more way of engaging with the users on the ground. Next, please. Yeah, we're giving here close other definitions like what is the climate data, what is next one, sorry. What is the climate product, what is the climate information? All this compared with what we can expect from a climate service. Next, please. These are what I have identified, and this is also what is in this the implementation plan of the GFCS. Very important, this component. The first of one is, yeah, for sure, the accumulation of knowledge about the past, present, and future state of the climate system. Then, how do we identify the type and the form of the services about the climate and its effects that are needed within the community at large, and with maybe within specific sectors, because the GFCS have identified also specific priority sectors. Next one. How do we deliver, develop and deliver advice and a range of products based on this climate knowledge? How effective can be the uptake and application of this advice to help achieve the outcomes? And a last step for me is also the identification and the discrimination between the users for the sake of the ownership of the uptake of the climate services to develop, and because also we need doing so to differentiate between what we call the intermediary users from the final end users of climate services. Next. And I wanted to also to link it to the ethical framework for climate services as they have been proposed for this the framework. To do so, we need to have a kind of integrity dealing with the people we working with on the ground about conducting practice. We need to be transparent, meaning that we need to build some kind of trust between the communities. We need to be humble, not presenting the information as more than it is and nor less than it is, because in our daily work also we have this main issue. And next one, the last one is, next one please, is the collaboration. The collaboration to build the climate services. Openness in the collaboration, listening to the user needs, allowing them to their input, and engaging in the process of co-production of climate services is, I think, very critical in this ethical framework. Next, please. So from the Red Cross Climate Center, how do we look at the climate services? The Climate Center has been involved in either assessing effectiveness of early warning systems at the community level, and developing education programs on climate for rural and urban communities. We have produced also contingency plans for climate extremes in particular. So this is looking more on the DRR side, not necessarily on the agriculture as the purpose of this talk. And supporting all the national Red Cross societies in developing their, what we call the early action protocols for forecast-based financing projects. Next one, please. I want to mention also how what we're doing on the ground is fitting on the framework of the GFCS. The GFCS had defined 5 pillars to conduct its operation, which are the user interface platform, the climate services information system, observation and monitoring, research, modeling, and prediction capacity development. We have developed, for example, with Mali, and Niger in West Africa, what we call the forecast-based financing for flood hazard and drought hazard. Next one, please. The way it is linked to these climate services that they are presented today is that at the end of the process, we need to come out with the menu of forecast for a map of intervention ahead of the events. And for that, we need a lot of climate information or weather and climate information, not only climate, as shown here in front of you. Next one, please. And based on that, we need to select some kind of triggers based on the impact of most concern we are looking at, what action to address this impact, to try to measure the hazard magnitude, what is the forecast probability for this impact. We need to determine the skill of the forecast used at different lead times. So trying to have in advance the full conditions to trigger action in anticipation. Next, please. And this is done really in partnership with the National Met Office, the Hydro Office, the disaster management, the social protection people, and international organization present in the country. And it takes sometimes more or less even 8 months to one year to build this kind of partnership. And for that, this is the map of flood, for example, we have for Mali, come out with this based on the Inform Index, Composite Risk Index, trying to layer the different layers of vulnerability and exposure to risk, which is not only about climate and weather forecasts. You can see that you are adding other layers, and this is how we conceive the climate service for the users in a specific sector like this DRR. Next, please. I think this might be the last one. Yeah. Thank you so much for your attention, and sorry for the very short time we had.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Chair. I think we have time only for 1 or 2 quick questions. So I have a look on the device, on the chat. You can still write a question right now if you want. I have 2 questions regarding maybe like very specific questions. So the first one would be, could you give us like a concrete example of climate services used by farmers in Africa? For example, which type of information and which kind of action they can make with this service?
Okay, maybe I will refer you to my next colleagues. It is in the presentation, but just to tell you, using my time, that one of the main climate services I have in mind is, for example, what the agrometeorological programs in Mali are developing with the Met Service and with what they call the GTP group, which is giving advice ahead of the season based also on the outlook of the season, on how will be the season and the type of variety of seeds they could use, depending on the onset of the season, the spread of the dry spells during the season that are these anticipated, the amount of rainfalls coming, many parameters, meteorological parameters that are used. And they are also involved in kind of training programs to better apprehend and understand the meteorological information. This is my first answer, but I think my colleagues later are going in depth in that response.
Okay, thanks a lot, Chair. We'll take a second one, and maybe it will be the last one, but we will have more time at the end of the webinar to ask questions. So how exactly do you define intermediary versus end users of climate services? And what are the main differences in how we should treat these 2 groups?
Yeah, thank you for this question. For me, when you talk to when you define your climate service, an intermediary one could be, for example, an administration, agriculture administration in a country, for which the need of information is rather on the data side, not a final output which is already crafted and understandable by this kind of final user. So it can be data you can give the Directorate of Agriculture of the country, which will incorporate them then in their own processing system to end up with the final another output for use. While when I'm talking about the final user is really the final receiver of the information, and that one has no need with, for example, data or other climate information. I mean climate data like projection or whatever. They need the final information and the way to process it. How do we do with this kind of information? And this is really a problem sometimes when you are not, you didn't define well your user. Intermediaries could be also a boundary organization like NGOs going in between a farmer and a Met service to broker the information and to translate it to those people.
Okay, thanks a lot, Chair. Well, we're going to take just a third one. I guess like the communication department will kill me, but it's an interesting one, I think. So just a quick, with a quick answer, please. Is there any difference between climate services and hydromet services, according to you?
No. Hydromet services are part of the. I mean, for some our organization, they are the climate services even, but it is not. I mean, for me, the service at the end need a supply and a demand. So the user side need to be there for the service to be really determined. The climate service, hydromet service is a provider, a climate provider. We have the climate information users, but so the hydromet is just one part of the system.
Okay, thanks a lot, Chair.
We can expand on it if needed later, but because we are really limited by time.
Yeah. Okay, we will go on. Sorry, Stefan, I saw your question. Maybe we'll have time at the end to ask it to share. We will go on to the core of this webinar, which is the presentation of the climate services report by WMO. So this part will be done by Veronica Grasso. Veronica is a program officer at WMO. She's a coordinator of the State of Climate Services reports, and she's also a civil engineer with a PhD on early warning system and about 15 years of experience in the UN. So, Veronica, tocate.
Thank you very much, Philippe, and good afternoon to everyone, and good morning if you're listening from the other part of the world. First of all, I would like to thank AFD for hosting this webinar, and secondly, and most importantly, for joining the partnership for the development of the 2020 report. With this, I would like also to thank all of the partners which contributed to last year's report, the 2019 State of Climate Services report. You will see their logos on this slide that shows the cover page of the report. And the contribution of the 50 focal points made really this report possible. So I would like to thank them, and the colleagues from FAO and WFP, which will present after me in this webinar, are among those focal points. So this report, it's the first of its kind, and is a new WMO flagship product, which highlights progress, opportunities, challenges in rolling out climate services for the agriculture and food security sector. I have to say that this report responds directly to a request from the highest body of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is the CMA, the Conference of the Parties, which in 2018 called on the WMO to regularly report on the state of climate services. The report was launched last year in Madrid at COP25, and up to now has been downloaded more than 8,000 times from the WMO library. And on top of that, it was consulted almost 2,000 times. You will find it if you visit WMO website and you go to the WMO library website. So if we move to the next slide, I wanted to show this graph that is based on information extracted from the nationally determined contributions that have been submitted to date. And you can clearly see that agriculture and food security is the top adaptation priority of countries. You will also see that 85% of those countries that highlighted agriculture and food security as their top adaptation priority have also highlighted climate services as key to help them to adapt to climate change. So my partners, our partners from FAO, WFP, IFAD, etc., that are listed in this slide, highlight that after years of improvement, the trend of people which are undernourished has reversed in 2014. So between 2015 and 2018, that number grew from 785 million to more than 821 million. And this happens at the time when the global demand for food is expected to increase by 50%. And if in the absence of ambitious climate action, yields may even decline by up to 30%. If we move to the next slide, we have to remember, and this has been demonstrated by many cost-benefit analysis, that climate information and services have led to improved agriculture and food security outcomes. So we see that information is key and is empowering in the adaptation context, but the capacity to develop and access these services is uneven and is inadequate. So in the pie chart on the right side of the slide you're looking at, you will see that climate services capacities are 5% identified as less than basic and basic at 25%. And this chart has been based on information received by WMO from 95 WMO members, covering all of the aspects of the value chain for climate services, going from observations to the provision and application of climate services, up to the user interface, capacity development, and monitoring and evaluation aspects. So we've collected all that information and analyzed it for this report. The map shows that actually the needs for climate services, as highlighted in NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, vary across regions. If we move to the next slide, you will see the value chain that I mentioned just now. So climate services actually hinge on a simple but comprehensive value chain that starts with the observations, then moves into the service production, provision and application of those services for users' decision and actions, which can lead to socioeconomic benefits. Citing the WMO World Bank publication from 2015, it is estimated that improving weather, climate, and water observations and forecasting capacities can lead up to 30 billion per year in increased productivity and 2 billion in reduced losses. If we go to the next slide, you will see that countries rely on a global, regional, national hydromet system which is composed of the centers that you will see in different colors highlighted within this map. So far there are 13 global producing centers, 3 lead centers, which you will see highlighted with the blue dots. And then there are 9 regional climate centers plus 3 regional climate center networks around the world that operationally share data and products and support the Met services within the countries to help them develop, operationalize, and deliver climate services and early warnings to their citizens. If we move to the next slide, you will see the main gaps that have emerged from this report. You will see that Africa and SIDS, the small island developing states, face the largest capacity gaps. Overall, throughout the world, monitoring and evaluation of socioeconomic outcomes and benefits is the weakest area within the climate services value chain. And this has emerged across all regions, which were analyzed for this report. In many developing countries, observational data are missing. Finally, but also this is a key aspect that emerges as a key gap, is the last mile. The last mile barrier, which impedes and prevents effective use of climate services from the people who most need it at the ground level. This aspect will be addressed by my colleagues, which will follow my presentation, Katyusha Farah and Anna Hero from FAO and WFP. So I will not talk about this aspect because it will be covered by my colleagues. So let's take a closer look at the results for Africa and SIDS. Let's start with Africa. And you will see on the left side the graphs that you will find in the report in the regional sections. So these graphs actually synthesize for this region the different aspects collected for the different components of the value chain that you've seen in one of the slides before. What emerges is that despite covering 1/5 of the total land area, Africa has the highest percentage of non-reporting stations and only 1/8 of the minimum density for observation networks, which is required by WMO. But given that the provision and application for climate services capacity is relatively well established, countries can focus efforts to derive value from the available information and at the same time encouraging investment in the basic systems capacity. If we look at what happens in the SIDS, I've in the next slide highlighted the results emerging from the data collected from the Caribbean SIDS, which provided data to the WMO for this report. It emerges that across all of the value chain components, capacities are below the global average. And this highlights the importance of a strong regional climate center, such as the Caribbean Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology, which provides crucial support for the Caribbean countries which have capacities which are lagging behind as compared to the global average. So for other SIDS-dominated regions, regional climate centers should be strengthened to play a similar role to support these countries. If we go to the next slide, I will conclude putting up the main recommendations which emerge from the report. The first one highlighted here is the need for a mechanism, a financial mechanism to support the operationalization and scaling up of climate services, especially in Africa and SIDS. So not only more support, but better support. We need to move away from piecemeal project by project investments and rather adopt a holistic type of approach that supports the global, regional, national hydromet system and addresses the last mile barrier. We need to support systematic observations and enhancing climate science bases for climate action. There is the need to address the last mile and systematically monitoring and evaluating socioeconomic benefits associated with climate services. I know that my time is over. I would like to put up my contacts. You will find my email here for more information. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Veronica, for that interesting presentation. We will have more time after Anna and Katyusha's talk to ask you a question. So we will go on right now with like one of the issue that you underlined, the addressing the last mile, reaching this last mile. So we will welcome now Anna Heureux. Anna is a Natural Resources Officer in FAO Climate and Environment Division. Anna work focuses on topics related to climate services for farmers and climate impact assessment in the agriculture sectors. Anna also holds a PhD in Earth Science System. Anna, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much, Philippe and colleagues, for the introductions, and also to Veronica for really well outlining some of the key findings of the 2019 report, and also some of the key challenges. And so, as Philippe mentioned, now Katyusha and I are both going to talk about this one challenge in particular, which is the last mile barrier. The last mile barrier highlights the fact that despite advances in the production of quality and accurate climate services, these services cannot be effective if they're not reaching the intended end user, as was touched on earlier before a bit about intermediate versus end user, but here are speaking about farmers, pastoralists, rural dwellers, or other people who are engaged in agricultural value chains. Some of the key barriers to reaching the last mile include the lack of adequate communication channels, services that are not available in local languages, climate services not tailored to the local level, or not providing actionable advice. So the climate service versus a actionable advice or recommendation to the end user. Also, finally, the National Meteorological and Hydrometeorological Services that are often producing a lot of these climate information often don't have local extension staff or connections directly to farming communities. So through our presentations, we're going to present some case studies where FAO and WFP projects have addressed and overcome some of these barriers to reaching the last mile. This is the first, a case study in Tajikistan, where an EU FAO funded project under which a pilot agro-meteorological network was installed in agriculturally important areas for production of table grapes, apricots, and cotton. In the case of Tajikistan, the Agency for Hydrometeorology plays the role of administrator for the Hydromet Weather Network, and as part of its mandate is the sole custodian of weather data in the country. But as I mentioned, as one of the barriers, they don't have significant capacities for extension or outreach to agricultural end users. And so one of the other components of the work done in Tajikistan was to create opportunities for different actors within the country who play different roles, such as NGOs, extension services through the Ministry of Agriculture, to discuss some of the institutional arrangements and agreements that would be required to bring this data from these services down to the end user. So on the next slide, Philippe. Some of the key lessons learned as a I mentioned are the fact that the co-production and effective dissemination of these services really requires this clear definition of the role of each institution or actor. So as I mentioned, the Met Service versus NGOs or ministries, depending on their capacities, their strengths and weaknesses, defining who takes which role within the country to carry out different services to get the information to the end user. In this case, the pilot program really acted as a catalyst for establishing these roles to get different actors to discuss how they can use the data and how they can support farmers in particular. One final lesson we learned from this case was that for future work in the country, that capacity development of these institutions should really take into account the needs of the farmers. In Tajikistan, many farmers that we discussed with had identified changes in climate-driven pests and diseases in particular as a service that they were interested to receive to support early management. So future capacity development for these institutions and co-production of services will focus to see how these types of services can be strengthened for farmers in the country. Great. In the case, a second case I'll discuss again briefly is a case in Senegal, which was focusing on communication channels and better understanding how ANACIM, so ANACIM is the National Meteorological Service in Senegal, how they are reaching end users and how farmers are interested in receiving information. So really a focus here on communication channels. This figure outlines some of the different current means through which ANACIM is communicating some of their climate services, and also begins to identify how many farmers or end users are receiving this information. So on the next slide, we also, through farmer surveys, identified some of the current versus requested communication means for climate services in Senegal. On the left side, you can see the current means, which are focused mainly on radio, traditional knowledge, TV, word of mouth. But when farmers were asked how they might be interested in the future to also receive information, many farmers responded that via SMS, voicemail, or digital application would be another means that they would be interested to receive these services. The second part here also identifies the types of services that were requested. And of course, as you could imagine, depending on the livelihoods of the end users, so agriculture versus livestock versus fisheries related products, the users had quite different requests on the types of information that they would most be interested in receiving. So next slide. Some of the key lessons learned in the Senegal case were that one of the reasons why many farmers weren't currently using some of the phone-based services is that ANACIM was not translating the information into local languages. And so some of the services were inaccessible for certain farmers. One of the second opportunities that was identified in order to increase the potential reach of the services to additional end users was the engagement of phone operators in the delivery of climate services. A second identified means for communication was this unstructured supplementary service data, or USSD. Some of the advantages of this type of communication means are that no internet access is required. It doesn't require a smartphone, and also very importantly, it has a feedback structure from which farmers can feed back whether the information was accurate or useful to them, or any questions they have, which brings to the fourth point, which ANACIM had identified that their callback services were often saturated and they weren't able to respond to all of the feedback that they were receiving, and so were interested to improve this mechanism for feedback from farmers. Next slide. The final example, I want to highlight a little bit of a different aspect of how climate services were strengthened under the framework of in this case, a regional project. This is a project, an adaptation fund project in Kenya, Uganda, and Ethiopia. And this project took a very community-based and participatory approach to strengthen the capacity, one, for farmers to be able to feed into how climate services were being developed and provide their feedback, and also engage farmers on the ground on how to use this information. So these community-based activities were carried out in 10 different communities per country, and you can see on the map the different regions where they were carried out. And to date, the trainings engaged over 1,800 farming households, and the project is still ongoing. So one of the first assessments within these communities that were identified was, again, looking at the communication channels that are being used in the different countries. So you can see that so far it was identified that radio remains the key current and desired means for farmers to receive climate information. But information from Uganda and Kenya showed that increased access to mobile phones presented an opportunity for also information to be delivered to farmers through smartphone and social media applications into the future. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that this project, this ACRE case, takes a very participatory approach to engage farmers in all different aspects of the production and use of climate services. So some examples are community engagement in participatory workshops, for example, for development of a seasonal advisory, really tailored to the communities, using local level information and also using the feedback to understand what types of information the farmers are most interested to receive. These workshops were mainly facilitated by the National Meteorological Staff and therefore created a dialogue between the producers and users of the information, so that the producers are also learning through the traditional knowledge of the farmers and through the feedback how to produce better information, and the users are learning how to use it. One final aspect that FAO is leading under the framework of this project is the integration of climate into the existing farmer field schools in the region to support decision-making. So the farmer field schools have very targeted approaches to different farming activities on the ground, but the objective is to see how the curriculum can integrate climate into this decision-making process and helping farmers to understand how they can make better decisions with the information that is provided. So finally, to outline just some of the lessons learned for this particular case, it was very clear that this participatory development of this seasonal advisory really supported to have location-specific advisories, and that farmers were much more likely to utilize information that was location-specific and relevant to their particular context. In the case of the integration into farmer field schools, this activity is still ongoing, but it's been a very interesting discussion to see how climate information can be integrated into the decision-making process for users on the ground. And finally, the last, as I mentioned, that the learning process is really a two-way process between the producers and the users. So this participatory approach really showed that the producers of information also get a lot of value out of this approach to learn how to produce better climate information for farmers. So that's all from my side. I think now we'll have another presentation focusing as well on the last mile with some examples from WFP. Thank you very much.
Yes, thanks a lot, Anna. And indeed, we will go on directly with Katyusha's talk, and we'll have more time after her talk for questions. So Katyusha is a Senior Climate and Disaster Risk Reduction Advisor at WFP, and she has been leading WFP work on climate services, focusing on the last mile over the past 5 years, working in Africa and more recently in Asia Pacific. Katyusha, it's up to you when you want.
Thank you very much, Philippe, for the introduction, and good afternoon to everyone. Before going into my presentation, I wanted to share two quotes with all of you. The first one is by Albert Einstein, who said, "Information is not knowledge." And the second one is by an American, Peter Drucker, who said information only becomes knowledge in the hands of someone who knows what to do with it. And to me, both are very much exemplifying what climate services are. There is a lot of information available, but does it translate into knowledge? Does it translate into action? And what we see today is that both climate variability and change are creating significant additional challenges to vulnerable and food insecure communities, vulnerable countries. While information might be available, it often does not reach those who needs it the most. And when it does, sometimes it's not easy to understand it or to know what to do with information. At WFP, we have a considerable experience, both in terms of both being a user of climate and weather information and a producer. We use this information to inform our operation, early warning systems for our own analysis. And at the same time, we've been piloting few innovations. One is the climate and food security analysis that support countries understand what the impacts of climate change will be on food security, nutrition, and livelihoods over the medium and long term. Or another example is how we use information for anticipatory action, for example, forecast-based financing, where we use forecasts to trigger funds and action, sometimes months before a potential event. My presentation today will look at integrating last mile climate services with example in particular of two projects in Malawi and Tanzania. Next slide, please. The projects are the GFCS adaptation program for Africa. Phase 1 started in late 2014. We are currently in phase 2. It's funded by NORAD, coordinated by WMO through the GFCS Secretariat, and it's implemented in both Malawi and Tanzania. And the second one is the Integrated Risk Management Program. Is funded by the Flemish government, only in Malawi. We started this initiative in 2017, and the idea was to support the scaling up of the work we were doing by the GFCS. So with the GFCS in Malawi, we were only present in 2 districts, and then we were able to scale up to additional 3 thanks to the Flanders funding. Now, initiatives the focus of our work really is to strengthen access to reliable, timely, easy to understand information. And this is because the idea is with good information, we want to empower communities to take informed decisions, to be able to anticipate and mitigate potential risks, to be able to manage climate variability, but also to adapt their practices to a changing climate. So today what I want to do is that through the next slides, I will walk you through what was the overall approach that we used in Malawi, Tanzania, but also in other countries. So the first one is everything starts with the users. So the first step is really to, when planning or designing a proposal, to understand what the needs are at different level. So there were several studies that were undertaken under the GFCS by CCAFs, ICRAF, ICRISAT at the household level, but also we undertook as part of our community-based participatory planning methodology, community consultations. What we wanted to know was, did people had access to information? What type of information? Did they understand it? Did they use the information? And if not, why not? Did they trust it? How did they take decisions? And also how they wanted the information to be delivered. And it was rather interesting. It came out that very often people did not trust the information. The forecasts were not seen to be reliable. People trusted their traditional knowledge, even though they did admit that at times that was not reliable anymore, but still they would trust what parents or others would say more than the information they would get sometimes from the radio or other news outlet. There was also a difference in how people wanted to receive information. Men were signaled that they were happy with radio and they would be keen also to have information delivered by SMS. For women, it was different. Women said that they would prefer to have extension officers because in the household, it was men who owned the radio, and they would decide what to listen to. And also the programs were sometimes during the day when they were out in the fields. And the cell phone was the same. Many women did not have the cell phone. There were a lot of people that were not literate, or sometimes the cell phone was with the husband. They did say, however, that they could get some information through the SMS because they had friends who might have a cell phone. So what we did, we developed a three-pronged approach that looked at extension services, deliver information through extension services, through the radio, and also through the use of cell phones to make sure we would reach everyone in the community. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the first one was the strengthening capacity of our intermediaries, which were mostly extension officers and Red Cross volunteers. The initiative was part of a multi-partner. It was actually several partners were involved, and so we were working closely with the Red Cross national societies in both countries. The training of trainers were done using the PIXA approach, which is developed by the University of Reading, and working with both University of Reading and the two national Met services in both countries to provide the information. What the training focused on was on strengthening capacities of intermediaries to understand where to access the information, understand the information, and then being able to communicate it to farmers. And with the PIXA process, the trained extension officers are supposed to make several visits to the villages before the seasonal forecast, just before the season, during the season, and then shortly after the season. Next, please. Next, yeah, thank you. So during this season, what the type of information that they would provide was providing information on the local climate and weather, providing information on crops, livelihoods, livestock, opportunities, what risks there were, all based on the local climate. And then look also at training the community members in a series of participatory tools to support their decision making, so to help them plan before and during the season. Next. The next slide shows an example of some of the tools and how the communities would group together before to assess different livelihoods options. What was really important was also to explain historical climate information for two reasons. One was because this would enable communities to understand how the climate had been changing and the trends, and also consider how they had already started to adapt, and discuss what else could they do to adapt the practices. And the second one was to build trust. The trust really, it's an important issue. By bringing the historical information, they were able to look at the years, and they remembered the years and validated together with the information that was given by the extension officers. And that built the trust because the extension officers were bringing information that they recognized as right, as good information. What you're seeing now is one of the participatory planning tool is called participatory budgeting. And this is used to choose between different activities that could also be slightly different than what they were doing already. Now, next slide. Sorry, I cannot see the video anymore, so I cannot see the presentation.
Hello, everyone. I think we have a connection problem right now with Philippe, so we're going to fix it in a few minutes, so you will be able to see the presentation again.
Yeah, sorry, I got disconnected. I don't know why. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, very well.
Yeah, sorry for that.
Not a problem. Not a problem. So as I was saying, there are these exercises happen before the season. Then what happens that when the seasonal forecast comes out, we organized what are called planning and review days, where we bring together the extension officers, University of Reading, the National Met Services, Ministry of Agriculture, and there is the opportunity to discuss the seasonal forecast and really to discuss what is the message that needs to be communicated to the farmers and what is the portfolio of options that can be proposed. It's never mandatory, the farmer decides. We provide a summary, an overview of potential options based on the seasonal forecast, but then the decision always stays with the farmer. Next, please. Then the next step was to provide sub-seasonal information, and this was done both through SMS and through radio programs in both countries. We had a mix of national radio and community radio, depending on preferences by community, but also on reception of the different radio. The content we have usually either weekly or 10 days programs. The contents are developed together by the radio people working in the radio, but also together with Farm Radio Africa, Farm Radio Trust, which are our partners when it comes to this component of the initiatives. Ministry of Agriculture, Met Services again, and us. And the programs give the weather forecast with an interpretation and additional information on opportunities. Also, it also provides expertise and an opportunity for people to call in free of charge and ask questions to experts which are invited. Next, please. To make sure that we would also reach women that at times could not listen to radio programs, so we created radio listening hubs. We provided one-up radio, and we made sure that in these listening hubs there would be both men and women. They were then also, each one of them would be tasked to relay the information to other, at least 20 people in their villages. And what was good is that they felt that they received information, they had an opportunity to discuss and decide also how to best communicate it to others. Next. Yes, and they are, that was quite nice. They said that thanks to this, they had become the local weather experts in their villages. Next. Something else that we are doing together with University of Reading, you will see in the next slide, is the development of an app to support the extension officers in their work with communities. It can also be used without internet access, so it can be used offline. Next. I want to share some of the lessons learned. So first and foremost, everything really starts with the users, which is very different to what has been happening until now in terms of pushing down information, but it's really the other way around. And when designing a project, that's your first step. It's important to create space for co-production. And we did it in the radio programs or when the seasonal forecast came out. And it's important to clearly define opportunities, but also to have formal agreements for this to happen. communication needs to be tailored to different needs and context and traditional knowledge. In fact, we have been trying to bring and blend together both the knowledge that we bring with the traditional knowledge as well. You need to have a two-way feedback mechanism. We have changed quite a lot in terms of the information that we provide in the radio programs, based on what people are asking us, based on information they want to see or hear about, and on their feedback. So it needs to be a process, and a process in which there is continual learning and improvement. As I mentioned before, it's the farmer who decides ultimately, but we strongly believe that with the right information, they are their own experts and they can take the best decision when it comes to their livelihoods. Partnerships are key. I know that others have also mentioned this, but it's not one agency job. We work with a lot of partners to make this happen, and this is really essential. Next. Again, I see time is over. Be very fast. It's a building trust that it's really important. It's no point in investing in delivering information, in creating processes or infrastructures if people are not going to trust the information that you're going to provide. And my last slide, please. Something else that it's important is that climate information, it's just one part of the overall picture. So you need an integrated approach. In Malawi especially, we integrated this with our R4 programs that has different elements that support strengthening resilience at the local level. And this is when it is the most efficient. Climate information is important, climate services are important, but they're just one aspect and they need to be part of a wider integrated climate risk management approach. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Katyusha, for that interesting talk, and sorry again for the small technical problem. We are now going to take questions, so to Veronica, Anna, and Katyusha. So there is already a lot of questions on the chat. And if we cannot answer your questions today, you can send them a mail. You have the email address right now. So I will ask a first one about last mile users. So how do you ensure that last mile users are involved in shaping the climate service from the outset rather than just recipients of the climate information? Maybe it's a question for you, Anna and Katyusha.
Yes, I'm happy to start. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So what we did is really to start from the users and shape both our approach, but also the type of products, and package them in a way that is what the user wanted. If it's not, sometimes the question is, what day the rain will start. We might not be able to answer that, but then we need to explain why, and we need to explain also when we bring a seasonal forecast, what is a seasonal forecast, the fact that it's not 100% reliable, the fact that it's a probability, etc., etc. So I think the first step is really to start with the users. Second is this two-way dialogue. We do a lot of, we have a very robust system for monitoring and evaluation. Our partners do the monitoring, we do field reviews. And each time we hear, we try and adjust. So we try and adjust the products, we try and adjust how we deliver the products to meet that need. An example is that how we work together with the two national Met agencies to not just use downscaled forecasts, but to develop locally derived forecasts. So using, whenever possible, information that was local to make them, to tailor the forecast to the local context.
Thanks a lot, Katyusha. Anna, do you want to add something, or is it fine for you?
Yeah, I don't know, as you think, maybe we could go to another question or...
Okay, it's up to you. So I have another one, which is a very good one, I think. Can the private sector be of some help to support, or do you believe that the public sector's job? So it's this question of public-private partnership and so on. Anna, maybe you have an idea?
Yeah, sure. I can start on this one. I think there's definitely a role for the public sector. I think Katusha and I both pointed out some particular examples for the radio or telecommunications companies or providers. There's the role to engage them and understand better how to define the role that they play within the delivery of information, and how I think it's shown in a lot of our case studies that engagement of the Met Service or the different actors with these private sector companies can be really beneficial from both sides. I think another potential that we're very interested in from FAO side is also looking at climate services along entire value chains. So I think we talked a lot in this presentation about climate information for production, but I think it's the public-private sector partnerships can come as well when you're looking at climate services also for different steps along the entire value chain, from production to transport and storage and eventual use of products. And so I think maybe it's something that hasn't been always addressed so much, but is more and more, I think, very important.
Okay, thanks a lot, Anna. I have another one for you from Jim Hansen. Hello, Jim. Why would lack of NMHS extension capacity be a constraint to reaching end users when agricultural extension services often offer that capacity?
Thanks, a good question. I think this was more just to highlight this fact of the kind of gap between the producers of some of the climate information and then how it is getting disseminated to agricultural end users. And yes, it's true, ministries often have extension services. Maybe the actual capacities even of different extension services of agricultural ministries in different countries is quite variable. But I think the major gap is the connection between the NMHS and these ministries, and often they're not communicating or having these strong agreements between them to share data, to share information. Both the ministry and NMHS could be providing a bulletin or some type of agro-meteorological information on their website. We're not communicating with each other. So I think this was really the objective of a lot of our work at FAO, is to bring these actors together in one place to discuss the different roles, as I mentioned, of the different institutions to play in climate services.
Okay, thanks a lot, Anna. We will take another one. I think this one is more for Katusha. So what approach do you use to deliver climate services when people prefer non-scientifically based, more it means traditional knowledge?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. This is very, very interesting. We haven't, let's say this situation has never come up. I think that people are using traditional knowledge. That's always they preferred, but they're increasingly realizing also that that doesn't work anymore, and they don't know why. And there are some, once they realize that the information you bring is solid, is reliable information, they usually use it. However, what we have been trying to do is this building of trust that I was explaining before, by going to communities and showing them the historical timeline, pointing out years, and also asking them, what happened that year. Communities remember very well each year. Sometimes, I was once in one of the trainings where somebody says, yes, I remember that year there was a big drought, we lost our animals, I lost my son. And so they really are the expert. And when you bring and you verify that information, we also asked, do you remember any sign? What are the signs before that? And we try and bring in, for example, we say when there is a drought, we noticed that this type of plants behave like this. And they validate. So we work with communities to validate some common entry point and try sometimes and blend it. In our experience, they never said they don't want better information. If anything, they are very thirsty to have good information.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think we have time to take a last one, or I would say two questions that are really linked, that are about gender issues. And that's also something that I would like to ask you. So, for example, how do you ensure women's participation, leadership and gender issues are addressed within the development and provision of climate services? And I think this is related to a recent article written by Ed Carr that underline in Mali, for instance, that climate services often are more tailored to men and to, let's say, the richest farmers. So what do you think about it?
Okay, I can start. We take particular care to ensure that we understand needs of all community members. So what we did through the community-based participatory planning was also to have separate groups. So we wanted to ask information to women alone and to men alone. And that's why we developed this three-pronged approach, for example, to make sure we would reach women. The most recent evaluation that we got, I know that there always seems that radio and SMS or cell phones are very good at transmitting information. But in fact, from both Malawi and Tanzania, we can see that these are less used by women. And the extension services remains the favorite options for women. In another case, and at least in our experience in Laos, but also in Zimbabwe, they asked us to go through the schools because then children would bring the information at home. And so then I go back to the fact that really understand differentiated needs within the same communities and develop an approach that meets the different needs using different ICTs or using different tools.
Okay, thanks a lot. Someone else who would like to say something about gender issue?
I can just quickly add that I definitely agree, and I think Katusha brought some really good examples of the importance of having information and data, gender disaggregated data of who's receiving, who has access, and it helps to really understand the context. I think also from FAO's side, the farmer field school approach really takes into account gender considerations in the targeting of different farmer field schools based on gender-specific needs and roles of men versus women in farming communities, and how farmer field schools can both engage both men and women and also identify the activities and support them through this approach. But I think they said our time is up for this question.
Okay, thanks, Anna. We will take a final one, and we will have more time at the end for all the rest of the questions that are all very interesting. So the final one is, are people more interested by short-term, like seasonal, or long-term for the next decades, climate knowledge? And how much are they interested in climate and weather extremes? So which type of forecast are they most interested in?
Okay, so right now, people are more interested in, at least people we've been working with who are very vulnerable, food insecure. They go from season to season. they really are interested in knowing what is the next season, when is the rain coming, and is it gonna be dry, and so on. So in some cases, it's really year to year. While once we discuss also the historical timeline and we look at the future, they understand the trends. At the moment, is really how can we manage both the increased variability in weather, the changes in the season, and also better understanding on the extreme weather. So I would say seasonal, sub-seasonal weather forecasts are really very important.
Okay, thanks a lot. We are a bit running out of time, so we will close this first round of question and answer, and then we will go a bit more to the discussion, and I will leave the microphone to Cher again, who will give us a bit his point of view about this report, and will address the question of how to create more useful climate services. This is a difficult question. Good luck, Cher.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for Veronica, Anna, and Katusha for this interesting report. Mine is more also to try to highlight what kind of problems these climate services are facing on the ground. And I would like to start first with a testimony I had interviewing some private companies in West Africa on how they see the climate services in their landscape. And one of them in particular from Senegal at the time was telling me that they don't view climate services as a viable economic service taken alone. See, in terms of climate data, forecast or whatever. And instead, they believe in mainstreaming the generation and use of this climate information within agriculture or other sector, in agriculture value chain services. Their business models allow them to be independent from a lot of contractual engagement, like the telephonic operators or telecommunication. They work with the National Met Services, whose expertise is to downscale weather climate forecasts in space and time, and provide actionable information to other value chain stakeholders. But he was not thinking that this could be taken alone, just be the viable in the landscape and, let's say, the markets in the region. The other point I wanted to also highlight is inspired by somebody from Cambridge, was just in a paper trying to find the ways to enhance the impact of climate services science on the ground. And I was sharing his view that we should reject any evidence-based mindset, rather thinking of evidence-informed facts, and trying to push the providers to embrace an evidence-informed approach to policy making, and yeah, try to go further in the dialogue they can have with the government, because from the policy decision makers side, they can understand this is needed, but it's not necessarily the priority they will put at the top. And they try to seek and to better understand also, I mean, the scientists should try to seek to understand those political priorities and package the evidence they have in a more influential way. Otherwise, as you said, they are informing battles, but not providing the knowledge needed to win the war. And that's why I recommend every time we start project on the ground to try to, first of all, have a strong buy-in, a strong engagement and commitment from the highest level at the national government, because they are ruling a lot of things. The other thing is also from the beginning, trying to also, depending on the project and the sector we are working in, to have a good identification of the user we are aiming, either an intermediary user, as we said earlier, or a final end user like the farmers, pastoralists, or whatever. This could help us shape also both our products, even our way of communicating to them. Yeah, be policy relevant, as I said, and in particular have a very strong partnership. I think Katusha talked about it, with the maximum of local stakeholders. It's not only an issue of the Met offices, of the hydro offices. As far as you are looking at the impacts on the communities, or maybe even talking to a technical department in the government, if you want to make this difference and having an impact, you should involve the others, because everyone has his own expertise, and it's only when put together all of this expertise that we can make a real difference and convince the final user and have the best crafted climate service on place. So these are my main thoughts, and I'm open to any questions before I myself ask questions to my three colleagues who talked earlier.
Thanks a lot, Shia. I think you can, well, if you have like a question that you would like to ask to Veronica, Anna, and Katusha, maybe you can go on based on your experience and focus. This will be of interest to us, and then we will ask questions to you also.
Okay, so maybe to Katusha, maybe also to Anna, I have a common question, which are what areas do you see as priorities for the future, and how can we work together to address these priorities in your own institution? Maybe WFP, then FAO after.
Many thanks. I have a long list, so I'll try and keep to three. One of the most important areas remains the gaps that there is in the basic provision of climate and weather information, and that I think it's something that really needs to be a key area of focus. In addition to that, I think it's to understand better and value better the role that what you were also saying now, the role of knowledge intermediaries and local communities. There is a lot of emphasis, and that's a good thing, on ICTs, on digital, for example. But in some environment, the role of intermediaries is crucial. There might not be at times there might not be sufficient human resources in some cases. Extension services in some countries are not sufficient, are not enough. But and then that can be complemented, or there can be other actors, lead farmers, traditional leaders, schools. But in some contexts, that's really important. Something else, it's also, again, something that you touched upon is, you know, how do we better demonstrate what are the benefits of climate services? And that begs the question, how do you measure success? Because all of us are implementing projects which are very limited, in a very limited period of time, in which we are trying to change how things are done. So to move from, perhaps we're not trying to, we're supporting and enabling some change process in which we want to move from a push down of information to information that is truly designed with the final users in mind, whoever they are, or the intermediaries, as you mentioned. And that takes time. And so very often, even when you look at evidence, it's not easy to say that we can achieve impact in 3 or 4 years, because some of this takes a longer period of time, especially when you're looking at sustainability and making these processes truly owned at national level by the different stakeholders. And this remains a bit tricky, and it's also linked to moving away from a project mentality to a longer term process mentality, and the funding that goes with that. Because if you think, when you start a project, the first year, the first 2 years are really starting up. And that's an important issue too. So I have a few more points, but I'll hand over to Anna for now.
Go ahead, Anna.
Great, thanks, Shay. I agree that I could probably identify hundreds of potential future areas, and also areas for us to work together. I'll maybe point out that, yeah, we found, in order to determine who these intermediaries are, so going from the evidence or the data, as you say, to what happens in between, to then the end users. It's been really interesting from different engagements in projects, in countries, in regional activities for major government actors, and also participation from farmers. A lot have, I mentioned this in one of my case studies, but identified transboundary pests and diseases and the effects of climate change on how pests and diseases and their distribution are changing. And so this is something that we're interested in, how this links to climate services. But I think it's one kind of maybe concrete example where the intermediaries of who need to be involved to support the creation of actionable information that farmers can utilize to determine management options may be different for this type of service versus another type of climate service, for example. In terms also of how the institutions can work together, I think it was put really well by Katusha that it's not really a one agency or one organization role. And I remember being asked one time, talking about climate services in a group of people from FAO, why FAO is working on climate services, because it's really WMO's role. And I think the more we've worked together with WMO and with different institutions, it's really evident that at our different areas of expertise and our different networks within countries. So the WMO network of national hydrometeorological institutions, where FAO and WFP working with ministries of agriculture and agricultural institutions really is essential for kind of creating the interdisciplinary products and projects and more sustainable work that we're talking about, not outside of projects. So that's what I would contribute.
Yeah, if I can keep you online, can you elaborate on the use of climate information being integrated into existing FAO programs and projects like the Farmer Field School program?
Yeah, thanks. So in that respect, I mean, climate information, I would say, is being integrated into many different aspects, but with particular to the Farmer Field School, this is also a discussion we've been having with WMO to talk about climate field schools versus the integration of climate into farmer field schools. And I think it addresses the fact, again, that the difference between training on climate purely versus the training on climate in the context of agriculture on the ground, to say, how can this type of climate information be part of the decision-making process that farmers take in the context of if they're learning different practices, they can take climate as one aspect of information that they know how to better utilize. And so it's been more and more integrated into the Farmer Field School approach. And now under this ACRE project I mentioned in Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, are developing in particular some climate curriculum that's really tailored for how farmers are learning in this type of farmer field school activity.
Okay, thank you. Now maybe back to Veronica. You have started to talk about the next report, I mean the 2020. Do you have already an idea of the theme of this 2020 State of Climate report?
Yes, hi Sheikh, thank you for the question. I first wanted to make a comment on the discussion with regards to the coordination raised by my colleagues Katyusha and Anna. I wanted to mention in this regard the National Framework for Climate Services, which is a concept and approach that countries have taken up, and the WMO is supporting members to establish these mechanisms, which are institutional mechanisms to coordinate the different organizations at national level to strengthen, co-produce, and deliver climate services to the users, and establish a sustainable dialogue between users and providers. And this actually touches upon the needs aspect. So these are mechanisms that help to collect the demand for climate services from the users, then support the co-production and collaboration needed to deliver these services. And then finally, these national frameworks also help to collect the evidence and ensure sustainability of these initiatives, which is an issue that was rightly raised by my colleague Katyusha. So just wanted to make a comment on that. With regards to the 2020 report, yes, we have a team. The team for this year report is disaster risk reduction, and we will have a special focus on early warning systems. So disaster risk reduction is one of the top priorities for adaptation that emerge from nationally determined contributions, but also from national adaptation plans. And early warning systems are a really effective mechanism to tackle not only disaster losses, but also to try to address adaptation challenges. We have new partners that have joined the report for this year. We have the Agence Française de Développement, We have the Cruise Initiative, the Climate Risk and Early Warning Initiative of the WMO, which is jointly implemented with UNDRR and the World Bank and others. We have the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. We have the World Health Organization, the Climate Policy Initiative, UNDP, and others. So we're really looking forward to tell you more about that. We are working on it. We will have some interesting case studies that will showcase the benefits of early warning systems being operated on the ground and much more. So more to come. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Veronica. Well, we are really running out of time, so I think we are just going to. I'm just going to ask you one more question, and then we will go to the conclusion. I'm really sorry for the rest of the questions. I was a pretty bad moderator, but I'm going to ask the last one. So, which is about financial sustainability. So, how do you ensure the financial sustainability of those co-production process for climate services? And there is also a question of the business model of the med services and so on. Maybe share if you want to say something.
Yeah, maybe just a suggestion and an idea. I mean, financial sustainability maybe is also referring to ownership of a process, which means a better implication and involvement in from the initial steps of and a strong backing from the national governments in the processes, so that we can see it with all the different projects running on the ground when they end the project. I mean, the services are stopped also. So it's good to have the support of whoever from outside, but unless we have a full commitment from the beginning from the national counterparts, be it at the governmental level or the national agencies. I think this is the starting point. Then you have, I mean, I think this is linked also to the business models of the med services or whoever, the cost recovery for the moment. And many people are complaining that the Met offices, for example, in Africa, are selling their data, not even services. But when you ask them, they just tell you that they don't have subsidies from the government no longer, or not enough. So they need to do some cost recovery, and they maybe need to be in that process supported to transform this kind of information into services, additional services they can sell. I'm also maybe doubtful about the size of the market for the climate services, depending on which sectors. But some are more promising than others. They can start with that. I know that some agriculture, banking, or insurances have started to invest in. Other providers of climate information from outside are also interested in getting their infrastructure installed. But as this is a very sensitive issue till now, I think that all the discussion need to happen there at the national level first, for the commitment of the national government, and then to revise the business model for a longer term, instead of selling your data, trying to transform them into sell services. Maybe looking at outside even the country, because if you have enough expertise, you can sell it also for the other neighboring countries or regional organizations. That's why are my ideas.
Okay, thanks a lot, Cher. Maybe like Veronica, Anna, Katyusha, you want to add like 2 words on the top of that?
Yes, thank you. I agree with what has been said, and I think a lot of my point on proving the effectiveness and benefits is because then what we really want is to have a allocation of resources from government, because they understand how important this is. And in Tanzania, what we're doing, because we have more decentralized budget, is that at the district level, we are looking at how, well, not us, but we're facilitating, and district leaders are looking at allocating resources to continue fund both the planning and review days and the trainings. Other steps that you need to do is from the very beginning of when you design your intervention to try and think about sustainability. For example, we are investing in, until now the trainings were done together with the University of Reading, but we have trained trainers, which means we have created a national pool of experts that will remain. So once the project is over, they can take over. They've already started to facilitate the training with just some backstopping, but they're able to take over and continue. We also work with Luana University to integrate the trainings, the information into the courses for extension officers. So to bring it within the curricula of extension officers. Another one was the radio. We chose where we could. We chose the national radio because we knew that if the program was successful, which it is, it could continue because it would be paid by commercials. So these are the things that the most important is what Sheikh mentioned, of course, to have those resources allocated, then to think of how we could integrate these into existing structures, but then also to have in place some strong agreement between different actors. And that's why for the co-production, there are formal agreements between the different actors, so between the Met Services, Ministry of Agriculture, extension officers, for the production of the seasonal forecast, for the production of the sub-seasonal forecast to be done together. Over.
And just add some last words on this. We've seen through the 2019 State of Climate Services report that the monitoring and evaluation of climate services is the weakest area within the value chain. And so therefore, it's important to think about monitoring and evaluation at the beginning so that Met Services and the stakeholders involved can demonstrate the value that can derive from climate services to attract more and more sustainable funding in the future. But if that part is not covered, then it's very difficult to show evidence and it's very difficult to prove the benefits deriving from climate services. So for me, that is a very important ingredient.
Okay, thanks a lot, Veronica. I'm afraid we have to close this Q&A session. Sorry again for the rest of the questions. I'm now going to go to the conclusion. Before that, just let's say a bit of advertisement for stuff that we are doing at IFD. So I will be the guest editor for let's say a special issue about climate services in the journal Atmosphere. So if you want to send me an abstract, feel free to do it. You have my email address there. And also I give you the link to an interesting paper that we wrote with colleagues, which is a review of the evaluation of agricultural weather and climate services in Africa. So you will, I think, find some interesting information about it. So it was just a bit of advertisement, sorry. And now we are getting to the final word, the conclusion. Well, I'm not going to say much, just like climate services, like powerful tools to increase the agricultural resilience. And as we discussed, reaching the last mile is a really big challenge. Well, this is not the only one, the business model as well. Inequalities of access, use also. So a lot of different challenges that we could not address today, but maybe in another webinar. And finally, we only talk about agriculture, but it's also important for water, health, energy, and disaster risk reduction, which will be the topic of the next report. So you see plenty of different topics that we will have to address in the future. Well, now I just would like to thank you for attending this webinar, to all the speakers, to the communication staff who helped me to design this webinar. It was not so easy because like the speakers are based in Paris, Bangkok, Rome, Geneva, so it was kind of difficult to coordinate, but thanks a lot to all the communication staff of the IFD. And thanks and stay safe, of course. Goodbye.
Bye-bye, thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.